Christians in connection to the resurrection of Jesus from the dead and being witnesses to that fact that Jesus has risen from the dead. And also in connection to the mercy of God. So we will have to begin like a classroom work. What is spirituality? There are so many spiritualities, but on a general note, spirituality generally refers to a person's connection to something bigger than themselves, like higher power, nature, or sense of purpose. It is about finding meaning, peace, and personal growth through practices like meditation, prayer, or self-reflection. I am defining spirituality in the context of our faith as Christians. In other words, what I'm talking about, the kind of spirituality I'm talking about here is the Christian spirituality. Now, this is what defined the early Christians. This is what defined the early Christians. Now, what are the characteristics of the spirituality of the early Christians? One of them is love. But before this love, the early Christians gathered together and they wanted to practice their life, live a life that resembles the life of Jesus. That's the background of the early Christian spirituality. They gathered together and they wanted to live their life that resembles the life of Jesus. So their spirituality was built on love. They loved each other so much. So much that anything that offends that love was considered a great offense. Another characteristic of this spirituality is Eucharist, the body of Christ. Spirituality of the early Christians was centered on the body and blood of Christ. In other words, the Eucharist. They consumed the body and blood of Christ. This Eucharist was in the center of their life because as they eat the body and blood of Christ, they make effort to live like Jesus. And also, the Eucharist that they eat gave them the strength, became a strength for them to believe in God and to live like Jesus. So, we can say that their spirituality was Eucharistic centered. It was centered on Christ. Another characteristic of this spirituality is communal. Communal in the sense that they were one. They gathered together and they were one. And you can see that they sold all their things and brought together before the apostles, and they were eating from one purse, one treasury, one bank account. Imagine a large group of people having one bank account. Those who had money, those who had food, they brought money. Those who had food sold it and brought money, and this money was considered the money for all. If anybody needed anything, he would be given money from this, and that will serve his or her needs. Those who didn't even have money to contribute, they also share in this one bank account because of love, because of their communal living. Now, this spirituality is important because as as Christians and entrusted with the task of bearing witness to the fact that Jesus has risen from the dead, we need this life. This life was fruitful because, as you can see, those who saw them living this Christ-like life just begin to convert to the early Christians. And Acts of the Apostles 2, verse 37 to 40 or 45, tells us that those who looked at the life of the early Christians admired them and got converted to them. And the number was about 3,000, meaning there were, I'm saying about 3,000 because there were actually more than 3,000 people who converted to Christianity, joined the early Christians, and started living life of Christ. So that is why I'm saying this life, this spirituality of the early Christians was fruitful because it brought about conversion. People who saw them, they exclaimed, I said, see how they love each other. Now, if as Christians, Jesus has risen from the dead, and we have the responsibility of bearing witness to the risen Christ, we need aspects of the spirituality of the early Christian. We need to love each other so that our Christianity can be effective, so that even without a word, we can influence another person to fall in love with Jesus without necessarily carrying the Bible to talk to the person. What the person sees is stronger than what the person says sometimes. Because if I preach and my way of life is different from what I'm preaching, it means I am attacking my family myself. It means it will not yield any fruit. And so we need this aspect of spirituality of the early Christians. And when we live our life centered on Christ, certainly we will be different from others who don't receive the body of Christ. Because we are carrying Christ in us, we should live a different life. We must not come together and every parishioner of St. Paul be living in this compound before we will be able to attract a conversion of others. Wherever we are, wherever we live, we should live this communal life. We should live this love-like life. We should live this Christ-like life. We should live this communal life. And in fact, in African context, one of the philosophers or theologians, John Mitty, said, I live because you live. I live because you live. Means I can't do it. Alone I can't live. So I don't want to prolong things, but we are charged with the responsibility of bearing witness. And we need to model our life to live on love, to live on Eucharist, so that through the Eucharistic reception, through the reception of the Eucharist, we will always derive strength to be strong to bear witness to Christ. And then communal life is typical of Africans. We live in communities. What affects one affects everybody. Today someone is marrying at 8 o'clock mass. And you see that when someone marries, the wife becomes the joy of the whole community. Oh, one person is married and it becomes the joy of the whole community. And if the husband tempers with that wife, he's offending the community where he belongs to. And so, it is when we live this model our life on Christ that our faith can be strong. Thomas had problem because he was not in the spirit of the communal life, and so he was lacking in faith. But when he reunited to the community, his faith became strong. And also, his sins were forgiven. So, my brothers and sisters, today I have said it all, and you can see from the reading. So, we need to pray God to strengthen us within His love, strengthen us in the love for the body and blood of Christ. Let Him also strengthen our union, our communal life, so that through this, our way of life can bear enough witness to the fact that Jesus has risen from the dead.